I pulled into my driveway, the headlights cutting through the thick, suffocating darkness of the early morning. It was 3:30 a.m., and exhaustion weighed heavy on me, but something was off. My wife, Laura, had told me she was feeling sick and going to bed early. The house should have been dark, silent. But instead, a faint glow flickered through the curtains of our living room. I killed the engine, sitting in the car for a moment, watching. A shadow moved across the window. Slow. Comfortable. Like it belonged there. I wasn't supposed to be home tonight. Laura thought I was staying over at my brother's place after helping him fix his car. But I had a feeling, a gnawing sensation that had been growing for months. Little things, whispers on the phone that ended when I walked in, the way she'd flinch when I touched her, the sudden need to work late despite never caring about her job before. I stepped out of the car, careful to close the door without a sound. The motion light above the garage flickered on as I moved toward the side of the house, staying in the shadows. I pressed my back against the cold brick wall beneath the living room window, listening. Soft laughter. A low murmur of voices. I reached into my pocket, pulling out my phone and opening the camera. The front door was locked, but that didn't matter. I still had the key. I slid it into the lock slowly, turning it inch by inch. The door creaked as I pushed it open, just enough to see inside. There she was. Laura, sitting on the couch, leaning into another man. His arm draped casually over her shoulders, fingers tracing circles on her arm. A half-empty bottle of wine sat on the coffee table, 2 glasses beside it. The man was relaxed, comfortable, like this was his home, not mine. I clenched my jaw, forcing myself to stay calm. This wasn't the time to react. This was the time to observe, to gather everything I needed. Bursting in now would only give them a chance to twist the story, to make excuses. I lifted my phone, hitting record. Laura giggled at something he said, then leaned closer, pressing her lips to his. Not just a peck. A deep, lingering kiss, like she'd forgotten the man she'd promised to love and be faithful to was standing just a few feet away. My vision blurred at the edges, a cold clarity washing over me. I had everything I needed. I stepped back, locking the door again, and walked toward my car. Laura didn't know it yet, but she'd just made the worst mistake of her life. I drove away from the house, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. The streets were empty, silent, but my mind was anything but. I replayed the scene over and over, the way she leaned into him, the way she kissed him like I never existed. I pulled into an empty parking lot near a 24-hour diner. The neon sign buzzed above me, casting a red glow over the hood of my car. I needed a plan. This wasn't just about leaving her. No. That would be too easy. She needed to feel this, to understand the depth of what she had done. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, expecting some last-minute excuse from Laura, but it wasn't her. It was my brother, James. Hey, man. Everything all right? James had always been sharp. He could read people better than anyone I knew. If there was anyone I could trust right now, it was him. I need to talk. Meet me at the diner on 5th. Give me 10 minutes. I ended the call and stepped out of the car. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of fried food from the diner. I walked inside, choosing a booth in the back, away from the few late-night customers. A waitress poured me a cup of coffee without asking, probably assuming I was just another sleepless guy with a lot on his mind. She wasn't wrong. James walked in a few minutes later, his eyes scanning the room before locking onto mine. He slid into the booth across from me. "What's going on?" he asked, his voice low but firm. I pulled out my phone, opened the video, and slid it across the table. He picked it up, his face darkening as he watched. When the video ended, he let out a slow breath and placed the phone face down on the table. "That's messed up," he muttered. "How long?" I don't know. But long enough that she's comfortable bringing him into my house. James nodded, running a hand through his short-cropped hair. What are you thinking? I stared at the black surface of my coffee. I'm not divorcing her yet. He raised an eyebrow. You planning on making her life hell first? A slow, humorless smile tugged at the corner of my mouth. Something like that. James leaned back, crossing his arms. All right. What's the plan? I looked up at him, my mind already forming the next steps. I need to know who he is. Where he works. Everything. If she's screwing him in my house, I guarantee this isn't just some random fling. He's comfortable. He feels safe. That means he has something to lose. James smirked. I like where this is going. I took a sip of coffee, the bitterness grounding me. This isn't about getting even, I said. This is about making sure she regrets every single second of this. James lifted his cup in a mock toast. Then let's get to work. James was always good at digging up dirt. He had a way of finding out things people didn't want known, a skill that had gotten him into trouble more than once growing up. But this time, I needed that skill more than ever. We left the diner, the night air cooler now. James leaned against my car, pulling out his phone. You got a name? He asked. I clenched my jaw. Not yet. James smirked. Then let's start with the basics. What do you know about him? I thought back to the video, to what little I had seen of him. Balding. Mid-40s, maybe early 50s. Expensive suit. Comfortable in my house, which means she's known him a while. Could be someone from work, maybe a boss. She always talked about how important her job was, how she had to stay late for meetings. James nodded, tapping on his phone. All right. Let's check her workplace first. What's the company? Bradford and Mills Financial. James whistled. That's big money. If this guy's in upper management, we're talking six-figure salaries, maybe more. I exhaled slowly, my mind racing. And a reputation to protect. Exactly, James said. Give me a day. I'll find him. I nodded, knowing he would. James wasn't the kind of guy who failed at things like this. While you do that, I need to get back in the house, I said. James raised an eyebrow. You sure that's a good idea? I don't plan on talking to her, I said. I just need to get some things. And I want to see how she acts when she doesn't think I'm watching. James shook his head but grinned. You always were the patient one. I didn't answer. I just got in my car and drove. The house was dark when I pulled into the driveway. Her car was there, but there was no sign of anyone else. I moved quietly, unlocking the front door and stepping inside. Everything looked the same, but it felt different. Like the walls themselves had absorbed the betrayal. I moved through the house, taking only what I needed, some clothes, my laptop, a few personal things. Then I hesitated outside the bedroom door. I didn't want to go in. But I had to. The bed was made. Fresh sheets. Of course. I checked the nightstand. Her phone wasn't there. She was careful now. I walked back down the hallway and stopped at the kitchen. That's when I noticed it. A wine glass in the sink. Just one. She was drinking alone. Good. Let it sink in, Laura. Let the silence eat away at you. I left without a sound. Tomorrow, the real game would begin. I woke up early. Sleep was a waste of time when a plan was forming in my head. By 8 a.m., I was already sitting in my car near a coffee shop on the corner, watching the Bradford and Mills Financial building. People hurried to work, stepping through the glass doors, unaware that today would be just another routine day for them. But not for one man. I was waiting for James's call. He never failed. At exactly 8:15, my phone buzzed. "Got a name," he said without any introductions. I gripped the steering wheel. "Tell me." "Henry Clark. Chief Investment Officer. Been with the company for 15 years. Married. 2 kids. Family guy. But apparently, he enjoys screwing other men's wives." My jaw clenched. I wonder if his wife knows. James chuckled. "Doubt it. But she will." I glanced at the entrance of the building. The flow of people was steady. "Is he in yet?" "Just walked in," James confirmed. Black suit, grey shirt. Balding. Walks like he owns the damn place. Looks like a man who thinks he's untouchable. He's about to find out he's wrong. James let out a low laugh. "What's your move?" "First, I need to see him up close." I hung up and stepped out of the car. The lobby was busy. I sat down on a leather couch near the reception desk, pretending to be waiting for an appointment. A few minutes later, I saw him. Henry Clark. He moved with the kind of slow confidence that came from years of never being challenged. This was a man who never looked over his shoulder. A man who believed the world revolved around him. I watched him carefully. Every little movement. The way he joked with his colleagues. The way he checked his phone. Maybe he was texting her. Laura. My hands curled into fists, but I forced myself to stay composed. The time to act hadn't come yet. But soon. Very soon. I waited until he disappeared into the elevator, then pulled out my phone. James. Yeah. His wife. Get me everything on her. A pause. You thinking of telling her? I exhaled slowly. Not yet. But I need leverage. James hummed in approval. Smart. I'll send you what I find. I hung up and stood, straightening my jacket. It was time to lay the groundwork. Henry Clark had no idea that today was the beginning of the end. By noon, I had everything I needed. James worked fast. Her name's Rebecca Clark, he said over the phone. Married for 20 years. 2 daughters. PDA mom. Volunteers at the local church. She's the perfect suburban wife. I smirked. Not so perfect. Her husband is screwing my wife. James chuckled. Guess she doesn't know that part. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the stack of papers in front of me. Photos of Henry and Rebecca at some charity event. A Christmas card from last year. A list of her social media accounts. Where is she now? James didn't hesitate. At home. 843 Willow Creek Drive. Gated community, but nothing you can't get past. She usually leaves around 2 to pick up the kids from school. I glanced at the clock. 1:30 p.m. Perfect. The neighborhood was exactly what I expected. Pristine lawns. SUVs in driveways. A place where people pretended their lives were perfect. I parked a few houses down and walked to 843. The house was nice. White exterior. Green shutters. A big oak tree in the front yard. I rang the doorbell. A minute later, the door opened, and there she was. Rebecca Clark. Blonde, late 40s, elegant but slightly tired looking. The kind of woman who had built a life around her family. She frowned. Can I help you? I kept my expression calm. Rebecca Clark? Yes. I think we need to talk. It's about your husband. Her face changed. Caution. Confusion. A flicker of fear. "Who are you?" I pulled out my phone and tapped the screen. The image of Henry stepping into my house at 3 a.m. filled the display. Her breath caught. I turned the phone so she could see the next photo. My wife opening the door for him. Her hand went to her chest. "No. That's not. That can't be right." I tilted my head. "It is. And there's more." She stared at the screen, her whole world crumbling in front of her. Why are you showing me this?" I slipped the phone back into my pocket. "Because we both deserve better. And because I need your help." She swallowed hard. "Help with what?" I smiled. "Destroying him." Rebecca stood frozen in the doorway, her knuckles white as she gripped the frame. I could see the war happening in her head, denial, anger, disbelief. But the pictures didn't lie. Neither did the timestamps. "You sure?" Her voice was barely above a whisper. I nodded. "I wouldn't be here otherwise." She blinked rapidly, her jaw tightening. "How long?" "At least a few months. Maybe longer." She let out a shaky breath and turned away, stepping back into the house. "Come in," she muttered. I followed, shutting the door behind me. The house was exactly what I'd expected, a perfect suburban home. Polished hardwood floors. Framed family photos lining the walls. A candle burning on the kitchen counter, filling the air with some vanilla scent. The kind of place that screamed stability, trust, and love. What a joke. Rebecca moved to the kitchen island, placing her hands flat on the marble surface, staring down at it. "I had my suspicions," she admitted. Late meetings. Business trips that didn't add up. The way he'd come home smelling like hotel soap. She let out a bitter laugh. "But I never imagined this. Never thought he'd be with someone's wife." I pulled out my phone and scrolled through the photos again. "Not just any wife," I said, setting the phone on the counter. "Mine." She glanced down, her lip trembling as she looked at the images again. Then she reached for the phone and swiped through them slowly, her breath hitching with each one. "God," she whispered. Her hands clenched into fists. "I want to destroy him," she said through gritted teeth. I leaned against the counter, watching her carefully. "That's exactly why I came here." She met my gaze, her expression shifting from pain to something colder. "What's your plan?" I smirked. "Oh, I have a few ideas. But first, tell me, what would hurt him the most?" She let out a slow breath and straightened. "His reputation. Henry is obsessed with his image. The perfect businessman. The perfect family man. He's worked his whole life to be seen as honorable, respectable." She scoffed. "If people knew the truth, he'd lose everything." I nodded. "Good. That gives us options. But what about you?" She frowned. "What do you mean?" "I mean, what do you want out of this?" She hesitated, looking down at her wedding ring. "I don't know," she admitted. "I always thought I'd grow old with him. That we'd watch our daughters get married, travel when we retired." She shook her head. "But now? Now, I just want him to suffer." I picked up my phone and scrolled to a different set of images, financial records. "He's been taking money from your accounts," I said, sliding the phone back to her. Her eyes widened. "What?" "I had someone dig into his finances. He's been moving small amounts here and there into a private account. At first, I thought it was just for hotel rooms, gifts, the usual. But the amounts are getting bigger. He's preparing for something." She gritted her teeth. "He's planning to leave me." I didn't respond. She already knew the answer. She let out a slow, shaky breath, then lifted her chin. Then we hit him first. I smiled. That's what I wanted to hear. Rebecca was sharper than I expected. Within an hour, she had pulled out bank statements, emails, and phone records. The evidence was overwhelming. Henry wasn't just cheating, he was siphoning money, probably planning to start fresh somewhere else. How do we use this? She asked. I tapped my fingers on the table. We ruin him professionally first. You said his reputation is everything. If his company sees him as a liability, they'll cut him loose. But we need to be smart about it. She nodded. What about the affair? I exhaled slowly. That comes next. We let him think he's in control. Then, when he least expects it, we take it all away. Rebecca's lips curled into a wicked smile. I like the way you think. I leaned back in my chair. Then let's get started. Rebecca paced back and forth in her kitchen, gripping a glass of wine she hadn't even taken a sip from. The air between us was tense, but not with words, just the anticipation of action. So what's the first step? She asked, stopping in front of me. I tapped my fingers against the counter, thinking. We expose him in a way that leaves no room for excuses. His reputation is everything to him, right? She nodded, her face hardening. Then we show the truth to the people who can destroy him. I pulled out my phone and opened the file I had prepared, emails, photos, bank statements. Everything I had gathered on Henry and Rebecca's husband. I slid the phone across the counter to her. This is enough to sink him, but we need to be smart. If we dump everything at once, he'll try to spin the story in his favor. She scrolled through the images, her fingers tightening around the device. What's the best way to do it? I leaned in closer. First, let his bosses see it. Her eyes flicked up to mine. You think they'll fire him? A smirk pulled at my lips. They'll do anything to avoid a scandal. And when he's jobless and drowning in legal trouble, we'll show his true nature to his friends and family. Rebecca let out a sharp breath and set the phone down. I can anonymously send this to the board of directors. But what about his little affair? If we want to make sure no one feels sorry for him, we need to expose him as the real scumbag he is. I nodded. Leave that to me. Her brow arched. You have a plan? I smirked. Let's just say Henry is about to have the most public and humiliating moment of his life. 2 days later, everything was in motion. Rebecca had sent the evidence to Henry's company, and they immediately launched an internal investigation. A few calls to the right people confirmed that his days at the firm were numbered. Now it was my turn. I sat in my car, parked across the street from a small, upscale hotel on the outskirts of town. A discreet place, where no one asked questions. I knew they were inside. I had tracked them all week, learning their routines, their habits. Henry hadn't even bothered to change locations. And my wife was too comfortable in her deception to suspect that the trap was already set. I checked my watch. Right on time. The light in the hotel room window flickered. 2 silhouettes, tangled together in passion, lost in their own world. I tightened my grip on my phone and opened an app linked to a tiny camera I had planted in their room earlier that day. I wasn't here just to watch. I was here to make sure everyone could. One tap, and the live stream began. The link had already been sent to Henry's colleagues, Rebecca, and key figures in my wife's social circle. Let's see how they explain this one. I leaned back in my seat, waiting. The fallout was going to be spectacular. 30 minutes later, the first message came in from Rebecca. Rebecca, holy shit. You really did it. Then another. Rebecca, his company just put out a statement. he's been placed on indefinite leave pending an internal review. A slow grin spread across my face. That meant one thing: he was about to be fired. I started the engine, satisfied with phase 1. But this was just the beginning. Now, it was my wife's turn. The fallout began almost instantly. As I sat in my car, watching the notifications flood in, I could almost hear the panic setting in across town. Henry's professional career was in free fall, his company had wasted no time distancing themselves from him. By the time the board of directors finished their emergency meeting, he was officially suspended. Rebecca had texted me again. Rebecca, his wife, just kicked him out. She saw everything. Rebecca, he called her, begging to explain. She threw his clothes out onto the lawn. I smirked. That was faster than I expected. But I wasn't done. Not yet. The next phase was already in motion. I pulled up my contacts and made a quick call. "Hey," I said. "It's time. Post the footage." A moment of silence. Then a quiet chuckle. "You sure?" "Positive." "Done." I hung up and leaned back, watching the chaos unfold in real time. Across social media, the video began spreading like wildfire. Not just among Henry's colleagues, but within my wife's social circle, too. Every charity event she attended, every upscale dinner party she hosted, word was spreading. Fast. Then, my phone buzzed again. "Rebecca, she knows." I stared at the message for a second. Then, another text came in. "Rebecca, she's calling you." Right on cue, my phone lit up with her name. I let it ring. Then it rang again. And again. I waited until the fourth call before finally answering, keeping my voice calm. "Yes? What the hell did you do?" Her voice was frantic, filled with a mixture of fury and fear. I let a slow silence stretch between us before speaking. "I did what needed to be done." "You had no right?" "No right?" I repeated, my voice sharp now. "No right to expose you for what you really are?" She stammered, scrambling for words. "This is private. You can't just." "You made it public the moment you brought him into our home," I cut in coldly. Silence. She knew I was right. I didn't mean for this to happen," she finally whispered. I almost laughed. "You didn't mean for what to happen?" I asked. "Getting caught?" "No," she snapped. "I mean, it was a mistake." "A mistake?" I repeated. "A mistake is leaving the oven on. A mistake is forgetting to pay a bill. You made a choice." I heard her breathing, shallow and erratic. Then, a sudden shift. Her voice turned pleading. "We can fix this. Please. I know I hurt you, but..." I almost rolled my eyes. "I'm done," I said, my voice firm. "You don't get to manipulate me anymore." She let out a choked breath. "Please, just come home. We can talk." I cut her off. "I don't have a home with you anymore." Then I hung up. And I blocked her number. The next few hours were a blur of messages, calls, and confirmations. Henry was finished, his career, his reputation, his home life, all of it destroyed in a matter of hours. Rebecca sent me updates. Rebecca, he tried to go to a friend's house. They told him to leave. Rebecca, someone sent his parents the video. Rebecca, they are refusing to speak to him. Every message was another nail in his coffin. Then, another text came through. "Rebecca, I want to see it happen." I stared at my phone. "Me, see what?" "Rebecca, I want to see him hit rock bottom." I smirked. Me, and then let's make sure he does. We weren't finished yet. Not by a long shot. I didn't sleep that night. Not because I was restless, but because I wanted to watch it all fall apart in real time. The video was everywhere now. I had made sure of that. Every private group my wife was in, every professional circle Henry belonged to, his humiliation was spreading like wildfire. By dawn, my phone had over 50 missed calls. Most of them were from her. A few were from mutual friends, probably wanting to talk or mediate. I ignored them all. Instead, I drove. I wanted to see the wreckage for myself. When I pulled up to Henry's house, the sight that greeted me was nothing short of satisfying. Clothes were strewn across the lawn. A duffel bag sat by the curb. The front door was slightly ajar, as if someone had left in a hurry. Then I spotted him. He was sitting on the porch, elbows on his knees, staring blankly at the ground. His usually pristine hair was a mess, his dress shirt wrinkled and untucked. Good. I rolled down my window. Rough night? I called out. He looked up, eyes narrowing. For a moment, I thought he was going to lunge at me. Instead, he just exhaled sharply and shook his head. You did this, he muttered. I stepped out of the car, closing the door behind me. No, I corrected. You did this. I just made sure everyone saw it. He laughed bitterly. She begged me to leave, he muttered, almost to himself. Didn't even let me explain. You were screwing another man's wife in your own home, I said flatly. What explanation do you think would have worked? Silence. He knew I was right. But then he looked up at me, something shifting in his expression. This won't fix anything, he said. You think exposing me will make her love you again? I laughed. This was never about love. He frowned. You think I want her back? I continued. I don't. I wouldn't touch her with a 10-foot pole now. Henry's jaw clenched. I just wanted to make sure you lost as much as I did. His hands balled into fists, but he didn't move. Not because he was scared. But because he knew, deep down, that he had already lost. I turned to leave. But before I got back into my car, I gave him one final look. You should find a motel, I said. Or maybe your boss will let you sleep in his office. Oh wait. And with that, I drove off. Rebecca was waiting for me at the diner. She had ordered coffee, but it sat untouched in front of her. When I slid into the booth, she looked up, her eyes scanning my face. Well, she asked. He's done, I said simply. She let out a breath, leaning back against the seat. His wife kicked him out last night, she muttered. She's already talking to a lawyer. I smirked. Good. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she sighed. What about her? She asked, referring to my wife. She's panicking, I said. Calling everyone, trying to do damage control. Rebecca shook her head. She still thinks she can fix this? She's delusional, I said. But that's not my problem anymore. Rebecca studied me for a moment. Then, she nodded. Good, she said. She doesn't deserve you. I raised an eyebrow. You sound like you care. She smirked, but there was something softer behind it. Maybe I do, she said. You're not like him. You didn't deserve this. For the first time in days, I felt something unexpected. Relief. Not because I had destroyed them, but because I had survived them. And as I sat there, watching the sun rise over the city, I realized this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. I sat in my truck outside the house I used to call home. The sun had barely risen, casting a dull, gray light over the street. The house looked the same, but it felt different now. Like a crime scene long after the sirens had faded, where the blood had been washed away, but the stench of betrayal still lingered. I wasn't here for closure. I was here to make sure she understood, there was no coming back from this. I stepped out, walking up the driveway with slow, deliberate steps. My key still worked, but I didn't bother using it. Instead, I knocked. There was a shuffle inside. Then silence. A minute passed. Then the door creaked open. She stood there, barefoot, wearing an old sweatshirt that wasn't hers. It was his. I clenched my jaw. She looked like she hadn't slept. Her eyes were swollen, her hair a tangled mess. What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I took a deep breath. "Talking," I said. She hesitated, then stepped aside. I walked in, my boots heavy against the hardwood floor. The house smelled the same: coffee, fabric softener, and a hint of vanilla candles. But beneath it all, something rotten. I turned to face her. She was wringing her hands, her eyes darting between me and the floor. "I messed up," she said quickly, her voice breaking. "I know I did. But you have to understand." "I don't." She flinched. I took a step closer. "You think there's something left to explain?" I asked. "Something that makes this okay?" She swallowed hard. "I was lonely," she whispered. "You were always working, always tired. And Henry." "Don't," I cut in sharply. "Don't say his name." She shut her mouth. Silence stretched between us. Then I pulled out my phone. Her eyes widened. "You saw the video," I said. "So did everyone else." Tears welled in her eyes. People from my job have been calling," she stammered. "My friends." "They're not your friends anymore," I said coldly. "They saw you for what you are." Her lower lip trembled. "And what about you?" she whispered. "What do you see?" I let out a short, humorless laugh. "I see a woman who burned down her own life and then stood in the ashes, crying about the smoke." She looked away, biting her lip. For a second, I thought she'd drop to her knees and beg. But instead, she straightened her back. Her expression changed. Defensive. "You think you're innocent," she spat. "You think you were the perfect husband?" "I never cheated," I said simply. She crossed her arms. "No, you just checked out," she snapped. "You acted like I didn't exist. And when Henry gave me attention." I stepped forward. She shut up real fast. "Henry gave you attention," I repeated slowly. "And you spread your legs for him. In my house." She paled. I shook my head. "Save your excuses," I said. "I don't care." Her mouth opened, but I kept going. "I'm filing today," I said. "I'll make sure you get nothing." Panic flashed in her eyes. You can't just." "I can," I interrupted. "And I will." She was breathing heavily now, hands clenched into fists. I turned to leave. But before I walked out the door, I gave her one final glance. "You gonna wake up one day," I said, "and realize that you lost the best thing you ever had." She stared at me, lips parted, tears running down her face. I didn't wait for a response. I walked out. And this time, I wasn't coming back.